Hello, my NF Geeks colleagues. My name is Franklin Ruff. I'm one of those rare SJs that participates in the NF Geeks discussion forum and who watches the videos on YouTube. And I actually got involved with watching NF Geeks because I have two very close friends who are NFs. I am an ISTJ. I prefer ISTJ, but they prefer NF. And even though we've been friends for 20 years, I understand the Myers-Briggs. I'm certified to administer the Myers-Briggs. I use the Myers-Briggs in my ministry. There was some things there. And so I stumbled one day onto the NF Geeks YouTube channel, started watching the videos, started getting some additional insight, gaining a little bit better understanding of why my two friends, in my opinion, appeared to be as flaky as they were. Love them to death, but boy, oh boy. But also I hear about SJs a lot. We've heard Mike tell us about being an NF, being raised in an SJ family, and I hear a lot about NFs and how you perceive us as SJs. And so I decided that I would make this video and looking at the world through an SJ's perspective. So I'm going to talk about some things in this video and perhaps another video depending on how long this one takes. I do have notes. I've got it all set up. I've got a structure here. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about today is nuances in personality, because I think sometimes we put things too much in a box. And then I'm going to talk about some of the issues with SJ. We're going to look at how we see certain things in life, such as love, because I know that's a big NF thing, but how do we as SJ see love, and how do we show love, and why is it so difficult between SJs and NFs in relationships when it comes to that love issue. And I'm going to then talk about the strengths and weaknesses that I see in the temperaments. And the final thing that I'll probably look at is talking about strengthening your weaker functions and how I see that. And what you'll find is that Mike and I have it's going to be a nuanced disagreement on that. I think we come to the final conclusion together, but I think how we look at it is slightly different. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. And the first thing I want to talk about is nuances in personality. And why is it that you could have two ISTJs, for instance, that seem so different? I'm ISTJ, Noah is an ISTJ, but we're different. And there's certain reasons for that. One is I'm an ISTJ that was raised in the Midwest and who currently resides in Kansas. Noah's an ISTJ that was raised in the Northeast. Different cultures. And although there are certain parts of our personality that are just innate, they're just going to be the way that they are, how that is, what lens that comes through is going to be different. And someone who's raised in a predominantly northeastern culture and someone raised in the Midwest, it's going to be different. But to make it an even bigger picture, you have an ISTJ in England, an ISTJ in the United States, and an ISTJ in Italy. Three different national cultures. And what you will find is that that ISTJ that's English is going to look different and more reserved than, for instance, me as an ISTJ. I've got a friend who's an ISTJ, really an associate, who's an ISTJ and who is of Italian heritage. And if you look at him and you try to type him just through interactions in his family, it's going to look like he's an extrovert because it's a very loud situation. So we have to take into consideration culture and how our personalities are nuanced through the culture that we're in. Western culture versus Eastern culture. So while there are certain things that are going to not change. Basically, how we take in information, how we choose to develop that information, whether we like structure versus not liking structure, whether we gain our energy from being around people or not being around people, that's not going to change. But how that is shown to the outside world will change based on culture. Another thing that I think nuances personality, and Myers-Briggs gets in trouble sometimes for bringing this up, but gender. Men and women are different, and how men and women are going to show that personality, how men and women are going to enact on that personality, it's going to be different because men and women are different. I know for some reason people want to disagree with that, but it is a fact. It's just the way things are. We're different. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it's just the way things are. And then there's family dynamic. And this is a big one. I can't say that I totally understood where Mike was coming from in terms of being a NF that was raised in an SJ family, but I do have an understanding of being an SJ that was raised in a family where the family consciousness was NF, and where everybody in the family was a feeler, and here I was one who preferred thinking. My grandfather, for instance, grandfather ISFJ. Now, the consciousness of the family came from my grandmother INFJ. And so the family had that NF consciousness within it because the consciousness of the family came from my grandmother. My grandmother was the leader of the family. And then you have my mom, ESFP, and my aunt, who was a real tight part of the family, is still a real tight part of the family, ESFJ. And then I sat and I married an ESF, and I say ESFX because we're still trying to figure out that JP thing. Now, when I gave her the Myers-Briggs, she came out ESFJ. I have my suspicions, though. Being one who's a J, yeah. We're going to just say that we know she's an ESF, and we'll figure that last letter out later. But again, being in a family where everybody, even now, everybody is a feeler. Everybody. And I can remember growing up and my mother, and the difference there is not only we didn't match in any letters except for the fact that we both preferred sensing. She's extroverted, I was introverted. She preferred feeling, I preferred thinking. She was a perceiver, I'm a judge. And I can remember my mother saying things to me like, why do you have to be so insensitive? Or why do you have to be so strict? Or why do you have to be so critical? And you have to think, being a kid and hearing that, you start to think, well, okay, is it something? Do I not care? And it wasn't that I didn't care. It was just that when we look at the thinking-feeling dichotomy, that's how we make decisions. And I made my decisions and still do make my decisions in large part based on the facts and not the emotions. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that it doesn't make the decision difficult. It doesn't mean that I don't feel when I make the decision. It's just how I make the decision. In most cases, in a lot of cases at least, I don't believe necessarily in mitigating circumstances, but in some cases I will say, okay, but there are mitigating circumstances. But so, I mean, you could think about just being a kid and hearing that, and you're like, wow, okay. And even to this day, you get that sometimes where I'm surrounded by feelers, and it's like, I don't see it that way. I don't see it, and I don't think I'm being insensitive. I don't think I'm being hard-hearted. I think I'm being logical. A lot of times I can understand where Mike's coming from and talking about feeling like the outsider because especially in those decision-making processes, a lot of times growing up and sometimes even now feel that way. The difference now is I'm the head of the household, so I guess I basically represent the consciousness in my family, but I still have to take that feeling side into consideration because of my wife. So family dynamics does play a lot in. So we can our upbringing and our culture and gender and those things can affect the way that our the prism that our personality is seen through. And because of that, I'm a big proponent of people taking the Step 2 MBTI. This is my MBTI Step 2 report, and I'm going to show you why I think that this report is important. Because if you look at it here, you'll see, you can see that there, ISTJ, and it shows my preferences in each. So you'll see clear preference for introversion and a moderate preference for sensing, midpoint here for thinking. And the reason that I'm going to get into this, but the reason I think that that comes out that way is because of family dynamic. And then a very, very, very clear preference for judging, which is why I question the J for my wife. But when we look at this, what I like about this report is it breaks things down even further. So it'll look at different things. And this page you're looking at here shows in preference and out of preference. So if I'm on this side, I'm in preference, and I'm on this side, I'm out of preference. This is my preference for introversion, and you will see that everything is in preference, highly in preference. And you look at those two big lines there, those are receiving. I'm low key, and I usually get introduced. I usually don't introduce myself. And the other one is intimate. I seek intimacy in one-on-one, and I enjoy individuals more than groups. So you'll see that. Then we have the sensing preference, and you'll notice I have one thing here in sensing that is out of preference. Again, why does that happen? Again, I think it has to do with a lot of the things that happen in culture, in upbringing. What's out of preference for me is theoretical. And I don't have an issue with theory. I think theory has its place. We'll get into later where it bothers me, but I can see patterns in things, and I have no problem with hypothetical situations, and I'll trust theories. They have their place, but if it's the theoretical versus the concrete, I'll always go with the concrete versus the theoretical. But I'm the pastor. God. You can't say that God is concrete in terms of here he is. Their theology. Theology is theoretical, and I love theology. One of the classes that I liked in science, while I did like the concreteness of biology, I loved physics. So I could accept the theoretical. And I was in preference in everything else. Now here we go, the thinking and feeling. Let's look at this. You'll see that in two areas I'm out of preference, and in one area I'm in the midpoint. So what does that mean there? And again, as I look at this, I think my family and being surrounded by feelers had a lot to do with that. I was out of preference on the compassionate side, which means I have a tendency to be tactful, sympathetic, and loyal. I think loyalty is just an SJ trait, to be totally honest with you. But when it comes to tactfulness, I think about what I'm going to say before I say it. Not only do I think that's an SJ trait, I also think it's a trait of introverts to just think about what I'm going to say and how what I'm going to say will affect the person I'm talking to. So I can't always be as direct, and I understand that. Now, the problem is that sometimes you're talking to people that you don't know. So I'm going to err on the side of tact rather than directness when dealing with people that I don't know, simply to play it safe. And I also came accommodating, approving, agreeable, wants harmony. And I would agree with that. The one difference is that I am willing to sacrifice harmony if it's necessary. And then I was on the midpoint of tenderness versus tough. And I believe that sometimes you can be tough and you do it in a tender way. Sometimes you just have to be firm and direct and look, this is the way it is. But sometimes there's a little bit of room for tenderness. And then the last one, judging, when I look at that, you'll see I am in preference everywhere except for at the top. I was at the midpoint there versus systematic versus casual. And that's because I like to be systematic, but I understand that sometimes you just have to let things go a little bit. Now, I'll admit, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that, but I understand it. So I'll let it go. There were some things I disagreed with here because I scored very high in planful, and it says makes firm plans, and the opposite of that is open-ended. They make flexible plans. I make flexible plans simply because I understand the way the world works, and if you continue to make firm plans, you won't do anything but go crazy because something always happens that's going to change those plans. So I make a plan, but I make a plan with an understanding that something is probably going to happen, which will cause that to change, and just be prepared for it. And I think that's probably also a part of being in ministry, in that plans always change. Things happen. You have a plan to do one thing, and then somebody needs you for something else. So I think that's where that comes in. So I would encourage that everybody who can take the Step 2 MBTI, and I think it'll help you to get a firmer and better understanding of why certain personalities, this is the same type of personality, but why are there nuances there? Why does it seem to be different? Why does that introvert seem so extroverted? So I'm going to end this video here because I don't believe in going too long, and I'll continue with the other things that I said that I planned on talking about in the next video, and I'll post them all together. All right. Care to know my name, would care to